In a world that's increasingly driven by self-interest, instant gratification, and individual achievement, there remains a deep hunger, an aching void, for something more eternal, more divine, more life-giving than what we see paraded around in the culture. We live in a generation where people are taught to look out for number one, to get ahead, to preserve self at all costs, and to interpret kindness as weakness. But the kingdom of God operates on a different frequency, tuned not to selfish ambition, but to selfless compassion. In fact, if you want to see heaven invade earth, if you want to see the miraculous unfold in the middle of chaos, then you have to tap into the spiritual power that flows through compassion. Not pity, not tolerance, not performance-based love, but divine compassion, the kind that bleeds with others, that enters into their pain, that sees the broken and says, "You are not alone." Compassion is spiritual warfare against selfishness and apathy. In a world consumed with self-interest, where the primary concern is what's in it for me, compassion stands as a bold and dangerous declaration that God's kingdom operates by a different rule. It's easy to scroll past suffering, to tune out the cries of the hurting, to justify our inaction with busyness or numbness. But compassion refuses to look away. It interrupts comfort. It challenges convenience. It is not a passive feeling. It is an aggressive act of spiritual resistance. Every time you choose to care, to reach, to give, to serve, when the world around you says protect yourself, you are waging war against the spirit of selfishness that blinds hearts and hardens souls. You are not simply being nice. You are taking ground in the unseen realm, pushing back the darkness that feeds on isolation, pride, and indifference. Compassion is not natural to the flesh. The flesh gravitates towards self-preservation, towards safety, towards securing one's own interests. The flesh does not want to engage the messiness of others, the inconvenience of someone else's pain, or the vulnerability required to step into another's suffering. But when you deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow the example of Jesus, you engage in a form of spiritual warfare that disrupts the enemy's strategy. You become a conduit of divine love in a world starved for mercy. Compassion is heaven's antidote to hell's agenda. The enemy loves to use pain to isolate. He uses tragedy to break people, shame to silence them, fear to keep them hidden. But when someone shows up with compassion, it exposes the lie that no one cares. It tears down the stronghold that says you're alone. Compassion is not just about what you feel. It's about what you confront. It steps into suffering not to offer platitudes but to bring presence, to stand with someone in their darkest moment, and by standing, say something about the character of God. When we refuse to be indifferent, when we resist the urge to stay comfortable and instead step into discomfort for someone else's sake, we are declaring spiritual war on the forces that thrive on it. Neglect. Selfishness is not just a personality trait. It is a principality. It is fueled by a demonic agenda that elevates self above God, above others, above truth. Compassion, then, becomes an act of spiritual defiance. It is a declaration that we do not belong to this world system, that we are citizens of another kingdom. Every act of compassion is an invasion. It is God's love breaking through enemy lines. It is not weakness. It is strength under the control of the Spirit. It is the ability to say, though I have every reason to think of myself first, I choose instead to serve. That choice carries power. That choice breaks chains. That choice draws heaven into human affairs. The enemy trembles not when we merely quote Scripture, but when we live it out through sacrificial love. He loses ground not when we shout in anger, but when we love without condition. Compassion is how the church takes back what the enemy has stolen. Families, communities, dignity, hope. It's how the church becomes salt and light in a culture darkened by narcissism and self-obsession. We are not called to blend into the world's coldness. We are called to be burning with holy empathy, to look at the lost and love them, to see the broken and embrace them, to hear the cries of the poor, the abused, the neglected, and instead of turning away, turn toward them. That turning is warfare. That choice is not random, it's redemptive. Because when we move in compassion, we invite God's presence into the situation. Compassion is not just what Jesus did. It is who he was. And to reflect him in this world is to walk as he walked, to love as he loved, to lay down our lives not in abstract terms, but in daily, tangible sacrifice. The enemy is threatened by compassionate believers because they refuse to live only for themselves. They live on assignment, they live as vessels, they live as agents of change. Selfishness builds walls, compassion builds bridges. Selfishness promotes separation, compassion breeds unity. Selfishness isolates, compassion restores. Every time you pick compassion over comfort, mercy over judgment, generosity over greed, you're releasing spiritual force into the atmosphere that the enemy cannot contain or counter. You are reminding the world that love still speaks louder than hate, that grace still breaks through pain, and that the heart of God is still reaching through human vessels to redeem what has been broken. Compassion doesn't just feel, it fights. Compassion doesn't just sue, it stands. Compassion doesn't just weep, it works. It is the manifestation of God's power wrapped in human action, tearing down strongholds without saying a word. Jesus modeled compassion as active, sacrificial love that transforms lives. When Jesus walked the earth, he didn't merely speak about love, he embodied it in every encounter, every gesture, every moment of his ministry. He didn't just teach about compassion as a theory, he lived it as a way of life. His compassion wasn't distant or delayed. It was immediate, intentional, and often uncomfortable. He would stop in the middle of a crowd for a desperate touch, weep at the grave of a friend, pause on his journey to heal someone society had discarded. His compassion didn't flow only when it was convenient or when people were worthy. It flowed because love was his nature and mercy was his mission. He didn't look at broken people with disdain or suspicion. He saw their pain, felt their need, and responded with divine urgency. He touched lepers who hadn't felt human contact in years. He defended a woman caught in adultery, not with silence but with boldness. He restored sight to the blind, gave speech to the mute, and called the forgotten by name. His love was never passive. It always moved. It always acted. The compassion of Jesus defied cultural expectations. It stepped over social boundaries, ignored religious rules when they got in the way of mercy, and prioritized people over protocol. When others saw sinners, he saw sons and daughters. When others avoided the Samaritan woman, he sat at the well and engaged her in truth and grace. Tried to what I F it already, ye? In the crowd's away, and you walk accordingly. This wasn't just kindness, it was kingdom. Jesus never operated from emotional obligation. He moved with authority, with purpose, with holy compassion that brought heaven to earth. His miracles were often preceded by the words, "He was moved with compassion." That movement is what unlocked the supernatural. That divine stirring is what set captives free. Compassion was not a detour from his mission. It was the very path to revealing God's heart. The paralyzed walked not just because of power, but because of love. The hungry were fed not just for physical need, but because compassion demanded a response. He didn't perform for attention, he served with intention. Jesus never avoided pain, he stepped into it. He never ignored cries, he answered them. And when he looked at the crowds, weary and wandering, his heart broke not in judgment, but in mercy. That is what separated him from the religious leaders of his day. Where they were rigid, he was tender. Where they enforced rules, he offered rest. Where they excluded, he invited. That kind of compassion turns heads. That kind of compassion shakes systems. That kind of compassion confronts injustice, confronts pride, confronts cold religion, and breathes life into dry places. And Jesus didn't keep that compassion to himself. He called his disciples to walk in it. He sent them out not just with sermons, but with healing, with deliverance, with mercy that looked like action. He taught them that greatness in the kingdom is not about titles but towels, not about status but service, not about being first but being least. His compassion wasn't manipulated by crowds, and it wasn't diminished by criticism. Even on the cross, while suffering, while rejected, while bleeding, his compassion spoke. "Father, forgive them. Today you'll be with me in paradise." He ministered while dying, showing that compassion doesn't depend on comfort. It flows from connection with the Father. His wounds didn't stop his love, they became the evidence of it. And after his resurrection, he continued to restore, not with condemnation, but with compassion. He reinstated Peter, visited Thomas, walked with the discouraged on the road to Emmaus. He sought them out, not to shame, but to heal. That's the kind of compassion that changes lives. It doesn't just touch symptoms, it addresses the root. It doesn't just relieve for a moment, it redeems for eternity. To follow Jesus is to walk in that same compassion. Not a diluted version, not a performance-based kind, but the kind that sacrifices time, energy, convenience, and pride. The kind that sees the humanity in those the world writes off. The kind that acts when others remain silent. The kind that leads with grace before truth, yet never compromises either. Jesus showed us that compassion is not just something we do. It's someone we become when we are transformed by the Spirit. It flows when our hearts are aligned with His. It flows when we love with His eyes, serve with His hands, and move with His burden. His compassion was never about approval from people. It was always about obedience to the Father. He wasn't swayed by the opinions of the crowd, but anchored in the mission of heaven. That's why His love reached prostitutes, tax collectors, outcasts, and Pharisees alike. No one was too far. No one was too dirty. No one was too broken. His compassion created space for repentance, for healing, for restoration, for resurrection. He didn't just talk about love, He proved it with every step, every tear, every embrace. Every sacrifice. True compassion requires proximity, risk, and obedience to God's heart. It is not something that can be exercised from a distance, through casual prayers or good intentions that never materialize into action. Compassion demands that we come close enough to feel what others feel, to see what they see, and to walk beside them even when it's uncomfortable or costly. It's one thing to care in theory, to express sympathy from afar, to say the right words at the right time. But real compassion goes beyond emotion. It puts you in the story. It asks you to show up, not once, but again and again, even when it's inconvenient, even when it stretches your limits, even when it breaks your routine. Compassion requires presence. It means stepping out of your world and entering someone else's reality with humility and empathy. It means sitting with someone in their grief without trying to fix it, walking with someone in their confusion without rushing them, and carrying someone in prayer with a burden that is not your own. Jesus showed us what this looks like. He left heaven's perfection to enter earth's brokenness. He didn't send compassion by proxy. He came in person. He didn't heal from a distance, he touched. He didn't delegate deliverance. He stepped into the lives of those who were possessed, rejected, sick, and shamed. And he calls his followers to do the same, not just to believe in love, but to embody it, not just to agree with grace, but to extend it. That means getting close to people who make us uncomfortable. It means entering places that feel unsafe, where hearts are heavy and hope is thin. It means embracing the tension of being around messiness without judging, of offering help without expecting something in return, of serving when no one is watching. Risk is part of the equation. Compassion will cost you something. It may cost you your time, your comfort, your emotional energy. It may mean opening your heart to people who may never say thank you, who may walk away, who may hurt you in return. But that's the nature of love. It risks rejection for the sake of redemption. When you get close, you might be misunderstood. You might be criticized. But if Jesus risked everything to rescue us, how can we remain in our safe bubbles and call it compassion? It is far easier to give a handout than to build a relationship. It's easier to send money than to sit at a hospital bed. It's easier to speak about justice than to walk alongside someone who's been treated unjustly. But compassion calls us to move beyond what is easy and into what is transformative. Not just for others, but for ourselves. Obedience to God's heart is the foundation of this kind of compassion. We don't serve people because it feels good. We don't show mercy because it boosts our image. We move in compassion because God commands it, because it reflects His nature, because it brings His kingdom near. Sometimes the Spirit will nudge you to call someone, to stop for a stranger, to give when it stretches your budget, to forgive when bitterness feels easier. And in those moments, compassion becomes a test of obedience. Will you follow God's prompting even when you don't have all the details, even when the outcome is unclear, even when you feel inadequate? Will you say yes to divine interruptions, to inconvenient assignments, to hidden acts of kindness that no one sees but God? Compassion is not always glamorous. It's often hidden, quiet, unnoticed. But it is powerful in heaven's eyes. Every time you say yes to God's heart for others, you align yourself with His mission on earth. There is no substitute for proximity, no short, cut past risk, no way around obedience. You can't fake compassion. You can't perform it for applause. It has to flow from a heart that has been softened by God, a heart that has seen how far He went for you, and now cannot help but go the distance for someone else. This kind of compassion transforms both the giver and the receiver. It breaks down walls. It dismantles pride. It reveals the character of Christ in a world that often only sees judgment and performance. When you walk closely with someone through their valley, you become the hands and feet of Jesus. When you take a risk to love someone who can't repay you, you mirror the generosity of the cross. When you obey the Spirit's quiet leading to show up, speak life, or carry a burden, you partner with the divine in a way that shakes the kingdom of darkness. True compassion is never detached. It is never safe. It is never passive. It is a bold decision to move with God into the pain of others, to trust Him in the unknown, and to love not just in words, but in costly action. Compassion releases divine power that disrupts darkness and brings healing. It is not simply an act of human kindness or moral obligation. It is a spiritual channel through which heaven touches earth. When compassion flows from a believer who is filled with the Spirit and aligned with God's heart, something shifts in the atmosphere. Strongholds begin to tremble, wounds begin to mend, lies lose their grip, and hope rises where despair once reigned. Compassion is not just emotional resonance. It is spiritual authority wrapped in mercy. It carries weight in the unseen realm because it mirrors the character of God himself. Wherever Jesus moved in compassion, miracles followed. He was moved with compassion and healed the sick. He was moved with compassion and fed the hungry. He was moved with compassion and raised the dead. That movement wasn't just human empathy. It was divine power being released through love in action. When compassion is released, it interrupts the enemy's plans. Darkness thrives where isolation and neglect prevail, where pain is ignored, and where people are left to fend for themselves. But when someone steps into that darkness with genuine, Spirit-led compassion, they bring with them the light of Christ that exposes lies and dismantles fear. That light is not loud or boastful, but it is unstoppable. A simple act of compassion, one visit, one prayer, one meal, one embrace, can become the spark that ignites transformation in a person's life. The enemy fears compassionate believers because they are not just talkers. They are carriers of God's presence. They are not content to live safe lives insulated from the suffering of others. They run toward the wounded. They sit with the grieving. They extend mercy when others choose judgment. In doing so, they create space for God to move in power. There is a direct link between compassion and the supernatural. Jesus didn't perform miracles to entertain crowds or to gain attention. He moved in power because his heart was deeply moved for people. His miracles were expressions of love, not just demonstrations of authority. And when we walk in that same love, when our hearts break for what breaks his, the Spirit is free to move through us. Healing doesn't come through technique. It comes through alignment. Deliverance doesn't happen through formula. It happens through surrender. When we are surrendered to God's heart, and when our compassion is birthed in intimacy with him, our words carry weight, our prayers carry fire, and our touch carries healing. Compassion becomes the delivery system for the miraculous. Healing isn't always physical. Sometimes compassion heals emotional wounds that have been open for years. Sometimes it heals relational rifts that nothing else could reach. Sometimes it brings deliverance from shame, guilt, or rejection. When someone is seen, heard, valued, and loved without condition, healing begins to flow. The love of Christ communicated through compassion has the power to uproot bitterness, dissolve anger, and silence lies that have defined someone's identity. Compassion speaks truth, but it speaks it with gentleness. It corrects, but it corrects with mercy. It brings accountability, but it does so from a posture of restoration, not condemnation. This is where its power lies, not just in what it does, but in how it does it. The enemy deals in accusation, shame, fear, and abandonment. Compassion counters every one of those with grace, presence, love, and acceptance. When believers embrace compassion as a spiritual weapon, they begin to see their daily lives as opportunities for divine encounters. That moment in the grocery store, that conversation in the hallway, that visit to the hospital, that quiet prayer for a hurting friend, all become gateways for heaven's power to flow. Compassion doesn't require a stage or a spotlight. Its power is most often revealed in hidden places, through quiet faithfulness and sacrificial love. But those hidden moments shake the kingdom of darkness because they reflect the nature of Christ. The enemy cannot withstand a believer who loves like Jesus, serves like Jesus, and sees others the way Jesus sees them. That kind of love carries authority. That kind of love brings breakthrough. That kind of love changes families, neighborhoods, and cities. God entrusts his power to those who will use it to serve, not to dominate. He fills the hands of those who are willing to pour out. Compassion opens the door for his presence because it welcomes his heart. It invites him into broken situations, saying, "Lord, do what only you can do through me." It's not about ability, it's about availability. When you make yourself available to love with his love, God uses you to bring his healing into places no one else can reach. And in those moments, compassion is no longer just an emotion or an action. It becomes a conduit for divine transformation. A holy force that shifts spiritual climates, releases restoration, and declares that darkness cannot win where the light of God's love is present. God is not asking for empty gestures. He's looking for kingdom agents who are willing to feel what he feels, see what he sees, and do what he says. Compassion isn't just for the soft-hearted. It's for the spirit-filled. It's not just for the emotional. It's for the obedient. And when we start to move with that kind of love, that kind of fierce mercy, we don't just change people's lives. We shift atmospheres. We usher in heaven's agenda. We declare with our lives that love is stronger than hate, that mercy triumphs over judgment, and that God's power is made perfect not in lofty sermons, but in the simple, sacrificial acts of love we extend every single day. Because at the core of true compassion is not human kindness but divine authority, an authority that says, even in a selfish world, light still shines, love still heals, and grace still reigns. Through those willing to carry the heart of God into the world around them, ask ChatGPT.